A waiter heroically steps in to assist an elderly woman who collapsed in a busy restaurant, only to face public humiliation as his manager fires him in front of everyone. But the night takes an unexpected turn when a mysterious customer approaches with a shocking revelation that leaves everyone stunned. The Silhouette, one of the city's top dining spots, was its usual picture of elegance that evening. Quiet conversations mixed with the soft sounds of silverware on fine china. The intimate, warm lighting created a sophisticated vibe where the well-dressed patrons felt right at home. Ethan, a 26-year-old waiter, was weaving seamlessly between tables, handling the busy pace of the restaurant with the skill of someone used to such a high-pressure environment. With a tray of hot dishes in hand, Ethan kept his professional smile in place. It was just another hectic night until everything changed in the blink of an eye. The sudden crash of plates breaking shattered the calm atmosphere. All heads turned toward the commotion. An elderly woman, her face pale and trembling, had collapsed at her table. A large seafood platter lay in ruins on the floor, and her frail body was slumped amid the scattered remains of her meal. Without thinking twice, Ethan placed his tray on the nearest table and rushed to her side. His knees hit the cool floor as the surrounding guests stared in shock and discomfort. He immediately sensed something was wrong. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with urgency as he gently touched her arm. She tried to answer, but all that came out was a faint, broken sound. Her eyes were wide with fear and her breathing was shallow and labored. The wheezing coming from her chest was unmistakable. Ethan quickly remembered the first aid training he'd taken last summer. She's having an asthma attack, he realized. The once serene restaurant was now buzzing with murmurs and nervous glances, but Ethan focused on the woman. "Breathe with me," he said softly, trying to guide her through slow breaths. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." He exaggerated his own breathing, hoping she'd mimic him. The woman, later identified as Mary, struggled to follow, and Ethan could see the fear growing in her eyes. He knew he had to act fast. Just then, Ronald, the restaurant's manager, appeared. His face was tight with irritation rather than concern. He barely looked at Mary and seemed far more interested in the restaurant's image. "What's happening here, Ethan?" Ronald asked coldly. "Why is this woman on the floor?" "She's having an asthma attack, Mr. Ronald. We need to call for medical help," Ethan replied, trying to stay calm. Ronald's frown deepened as he glanced at the concerned customers nearby, clearly more focused on avoiding a scene. "Get her out of here. Take her to the back, where no one can see. This is disrupting the other customers." Still kneeling next to the elderly woman, Ethan looked up at Ronald in disbelief. "We can't move her. It could make things worse. She needs to stay still until the ambulance arrives." "I don't care, Ethan. That's an order." Ronald folded his arms, his stance unyielding. Ethan inhaled deeply, trying to stay composed despite the rising frustration. He knew Ronald wasn't concerned about Mary's well-being. He only cared about protecting the Silhouette's pristine image. But for Ethan, nothing mattered more in that moment than the woman's life. Mary let out a weak cough, momentarily cutting through the tension. Ethan gently held her, trying to keep her calm. He looked back at Ronald and said firmly, "With all due respect, Mr. Ronald, I'm not moving her. She needs help, and I'm staying here until she's stable." Ronald stood there, his anger growing more evident. But before he could respond, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. Ethan felt a brief sense of relief, knowing help was on its way. Still, the icy look in Ronald's eyes hinted that this wasn't over. As the sirens grew louder, the serene atmosphere inside the Silhouette had fully deteriorated into anxious murmurs and uncomfortable stares. The once tranquil, upscale restaurant now felt suffocating with tension as more eyes fixated on the scene unfolding at the center of the room. Ethan remained at Mary's side, focused on guiding her breathing as best he could, though he couldn't ignore the growing unease around him. The guests, who once enjoyed their evening in refinement, now regarded Mary with a mix of disgust and disbelief, as if her medical emergency was a blight on the restaurant's reputation. Ethan stayed close to the paramedics, making sure Mary was stable until the last moment. When the ambulance finally drove off, its red lights fading into the night, Ethan stood at the restaurant's entrance for a moment, watching it disappear. The silhouette was gradually returning to its usual routine. Customers, still shaken, resumed their seats, though a tension lingered in the air. The focus had shifted from Mary to Ethan, the young waiter who had defied his manager in front of everyone. Ethan knew what was coming next. He took a deep breath and turned to see Ronald standing at the office door, arms crossed, his expression grim. "Ethan, my office now," Ronald commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. As Ethan scanned the dining room, he noticed his co-workers' reactions. Some looked at him with concern, while others avoided his gaze entirely, unwilling to get involved. He gave a quick nod to Sarah, a fellow waitress who had always supported him, then slowly made his way toward the office. The small room was elegantly decorated with luxurious furniture and perfectly organized shelves of books. As soon as Ethan stepped inside, Ronald slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing in the confined space. Ethan stood his ground, trying to remain calm, though he knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. "Sit down," Ronald ordered, pointing to a chair in front of his desk. Ethan hesitated briefly but took a seat, clasping his hands in his lap as he waited for the inevitable. Ronald paced behind his desk before sitting down, fixing his sharp gaze on Ethan. The anger in his expression was unmistakable, even though he tried to contain it. "What do you think you're doing, Ethan?" Ronald began, his voice low but dripping with irritation. "I gave you a direct order. I told you to get that woman out of the dining room, and you disobeyed me in front of all the customers." Ethan straightened his back, keeping his voice steady but firm. "Mr. Ronald, with all due respect, that woman's life was in danger. Moving her could have made things worse. I did what was right." Ronald scoffed, slamming his hand on the desk, causing papers to scatter. "What's right?" he snapped, his face reddening. "What's right is that you jeopardized the reputation of this restaurant. The Silhouette is known for its exclusivity, its flawless atmosphere. We can't have scenes like that playing out in front of our guests." Ethan blinked, incredulous at Ronald's words. "Are you seriously saying that a person's life is less important than this restaurant's image?" he asked, struggling to believe the conversation he was having. Ronald shook his head impatiently. "Don't be naive, Ethan. Of course her life matters, but you should have handled it differently. Call the ambulance quietly, take her out the back, and no one's the wiser." He crossed his arms, clearly irritated. "But instead we've got customers upset, leaving and complaining. You caused a scene." Ethan could feel his anger rising, but he tried to stay composed. He knew this conversation was walking a fine line. "With all due respect, sir, she wasn't a spectacle. She was a person in need. I acted the way any decent human being would." Ethan's voice was filled with conviction. "I couldn't risk her life just to keep the customers comfortable." Ronald's eyes narrowed, clearly insulted by Ethan's response. Leaning forward, he rested his hands on the desk, his tone growing more forceful. "We're not talking about morality, Ethan. We're talking about how you defied a direct order and disrupted the operations of this restaurant." He paused, his words heavy with disapproval. "Because of that, you're fired, effective immediately." Hearing those words was like a punch to the gut, even though Ethan had expected it. For a moment, he sat in silence, processing the reality of what had just happened. In an instant, all of his hard work, the long hours, the money he had been saving to support his family and continue his studies, it all flashed before his eyes. But Ethan didn't let the sadness or fear take over. Instead, he slowly stood, keeping his composure, and looked Ronald directly in the eye. "If that's how it is, Mr. Ronald, I accept it," Ethan said, his voice calm but steady. "But just know this. Even though I'm fired, I don't regret what I did, and I'd do it again if I had to." Ronald looked surprised by Ethan's calmness, his anger momentarily replaced with disbelief. He had expected anger or submission, but not this firmness. The manager simply shook his head in disapproval. "Then gather your things and leave. You're dismissed immediately." Ethan nodded, fully aware this moment would be difficult, though he hadn't anticipated just how much it would affect his life. He left Ronald's office without glancing back, feeling the eyes of his co-workers on him as he crossed the dining room. Sarah, who had been watching the situation unfold from a distance, hurried over to him as soon as he stepped out. "Ethan," she called softly, her voice filled with concern. "Did he fire you?" Ethan forced a smile, trying to stay upbeat despite the sting of the moment. "Yeah, Sarah. He fired me. But it's okay. I did what I had to do." Sarah squeezed his hand tightly. "You did the right thing, Ethan. We all know that." Ethan smiled, grateful for her support, but deep down, he understood nothing could change the fact that his time at the Silhouette had come to an abrupt end. He felt the weight of his dismissal hanging heavily over him as he left Ronald's office. The air inside the restaurant seemed heavier than ever, and the silence from his colleagues only amplified the gravity of the moment. Each step toward the exit was a mixture of frustration and acceptance. Sarah, the only one brave enough to approach him, whispered urgently, "What happened in there? What did he say?" Ethan gave her a tired smile. "He fired me, and honestly, I saw it coming." He shrugged, trying to play it off, though he couldn't ignore the heavy toll it was taking. "But I don't regret what I did." Sarah's eyes softened with sympathy. "This is so unfair. You were just trying to help that woman. I can't believe Ronald would do something like this." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "He cares more about the restaurant's image than people's lives, Sarah. I knew that, but I still chose to do what I thought was right." Other co-workers began to approach, offering hushed words of support, but everyone understood that nothing could reverse Ronald's decision. Ethan thanked them for their kindness, though a wave of sadness and finality settled over him. He made his way to the locker room, gathered his belongings, and slung his bag over his shoulder. As he walked through the restaurant one last time, the space that had once felt familiar and even welcoming now seemed cold and distant. At the exit, Ethan paused for a moment, looking back. Ronald remained in his office, and life inside the Silhouette was returning to normal, as if nothing had happened. With a deep sigh, Ethan opened the door and stepped into the night. The cold wind bit at his skin as he walked down the street, the city lights flickering in the distance. The distant hum of traffic and faint voices contrasted with the silence inside him. He had no clear plan in mind, but he knew one thing: there was no going back to the Silhouette. As he walked, his thoughts raced back to the events of the evening, replaying the moment when Mary collapsed, and he made the choice to defy Ronald. He knew it had been the right thing to do, but the weight of losing his job felt overwhelming. Was it all worth it? Then, as if the universe had been waiting for this moment, a familiar voice called out from across the street. "Ethan, wait!" Ethan stopped, looking in the direction of the voice. To his surprise, it was Sam, the man who had witnessed everything inside the restaurant, Mary's husband. Sam hurried across the street, his face a mix of concern and determination. "Ethan, please give me a moment," Sam said, slightly out of breath. "I need to talk to you." Ethan, still caught off guard, replied, "Of course, sir." He tried to hide the exhaustion in his voice, unsure of what to expect. "I saw what happened back there, how you handled everything," Sam began, his gaze steady. "I was impressed. Few people would have had the courage to do what you did, especially knowing it could cost them their job." Ethan sighed, shaking his head. "I just did what anyone would do. That woman needed help, and I couldn't just ignore her." Sam smiled, but his expression grew more serious. "Many people would have ignored her, Ethan. Many would have followed Ronald's orders, even knowing they were wrong. But you didn't. And that's why I'm here now." Ethan frowned in confusion. "I'm not sure I understand, sir." Sam looked away for a moment, gathering his thoughts, before turning back to Ethan. "My wife and I aren't just ordinary customers. We're involved in a project, something directly connected to what happened at the Silhouette tonight." Ethan stood silently, absorbing Sam's words. He hadn't expected this, but something in Sam's tone piqued his curiosity. "What kind of project?" Ethan asked hesitantly. Sam smiled again, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I want you to be part of it, Ethan. I want you to work with us. We need people like you, people with principles, compassion, and the courage to do what's right, even when there are consequences. I know you've just lost your job, but maybe this is the new beginning you've been waiting for." Ethan was momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by the unexpected offer. It seemed too good to be true, but there was a sincerity in Sam's voice that made him feel it was real. "I don't know what to say," Ethan admitted, still in shock. "This is unexpected." Sam chuckled softly. "I understand. I'm not asking for an answer right now. Just think about it. Here's my card. We can meet tomorrow and I can explain everything." Ethan took the card, looking at the gold-printed letters, feeling the weight of the decision he would soon have to make. "Thank you, sir. I'll think about it." Sam nodded, extending his hand. "Take your time. And remember, sometimes doors close to open better ones." Ethan shook Sam's hand and watched as he walked back across the street. Alone again, Ethan glanced at the card in his hand. For the first time that night, a small spark of hope flickered inside him. He knew his life had changed forever that evening, and despite the fear and uncertainty, perhaps this was the opportunity he'd always needed. With a deep breath, he slipped the card into his pocket and began walking home, sensing that something bigger was on the horizon. "No one is born knowing how to do it, Ethan, but I believe in your potential. And from what I've seen, you're already on the right path. Think of this as a new phase in your life, something that can not only change your future, but the future of many others." Ethan felt the weight of Sam's words, but also an unexpected sense of purpose. "You don't have to decide now," Sam continued, "but think it over. And when you're ready, the door will be open." Ethan nodded, and with a firm handshake, he said goodbye to Sam. As he left the building, his mind raced. Sam's words echoed, "A new phase in your life, something that can change not just your future, but the future of many others." It all seemed grand, almost surreal. Walking through the city streets, doubts began to creep in. Ethan had always been a simple man, following a steady routine, facing daily challenges without dreaming of anything too big. The job at the Silhouette, though tiring, had provided stability, and that stability was how he supported himself and helped his family. Now he was staring at the unknown, and this new path came with a huge responsibility. Ethan decided he needed a quiet place to think. As he crossed the neighborhood square, a cozy cafe caught his eye. He went inside, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window. With the warm cup in his hands, he finally began to organize his thoughts. What am I really looking for? The answer didn't come right away. But he knew one thing. His job at the Silhouette hadn't been the end of the road for him. Something inside him longed for more, for a greater purpose. Sam's offer seemed like the answer to that calling, but the fear of the unknown still lingered. As he sipped his coffee, Ethan thought of his family. He knew they were proud of him, especially his mother, who had always taught him to act with integrity and do the right thing, no matter the circumstances. He wondered how she would react to the news of his firing. She might be worried, but Ethan was certain she'd support him, especially since he hadn't yet made a final decision about his future. But with each passing hour, he felt himself leaning more toward accepting Sam's offer. Maybe the fear of the unknown was a sign that he was about to grow and transform. That evening, Ethan sat at his dining table, the phone in his hand. After a few deep breaths, he dialed Sam's number, his heart pounding as the phone rang. "Sam Correa speaking," came the familiar, cordial voice. "Hello, Mr. Sam. This is Ethan," he began, trying to keep his tone steady despite his nerves. "I've thought a lot about your offer, and I've decided to accept. I want to be part of your project." There was a brief pause before Sam's voice returned, brimming with enthusiasm. "Ethan, that's wonderful news. I'm so happy to hear that. I knew you'd make the right decision." Ethan smiled, feeling a wave of relief. "Thank you. I'll be there tomorrow." The next morning, Ethan arrived at Sam's office with a renewed sense of purpose. When the elevator doors opened on the 12th floor, Sam greeted him with a wide smile. "Ethan, welcome officially to the team," he said, shaking his hand warmly. "We've got a lot of work ahead, but I know you'll be a key part of everything we're building." Ethan was still a bit nervous, but Sam's welcome reassured him. He knew his life was heading in a new direction. They entered the meeting room, where Mary, Sam's wife, was already waiting with documents spread across the table. "Ethan, good to see you again," Mary said with a gentle smile. "Sam has told me a lot about you. I'm so glad you've decided to join us." Ethan thanked her, feeling genuinely welcomed. They spent the morning going over the details of the project. Sam and Mary explained that their foundation focused on helping people in vulnerable situations, offering support, training, and social reintegration through partnerships with companies. They worked with the homeless, refugees, and even former inmates, giving second chances to those marginalized by society. Ethan's role would involve working directly with these people, acting as a bridge between them and the opportunities the foundation provided. His job would be to meet with individuals, understand their struggles, and find practical ways to improve their lives. "You'll be our connection to what's happening on the ground," Mary explained. "We need someone who's not afraid to face reality and who can navigate the complexities of each case." The responsibility seemed daunting, but with every word, Ethan felt more confident. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but this was his chance to do something meaningful. "I'm ready," Ethan said firmly. "I don't know everything, but I'm willing to learn and do my best." Sam nodded, clearly pleased. "That's exactly what we need. Someone with heart and the will to do the right thing. We'll start slowly so you can adapt, but I know you'll soon be essential to what we're doing here." The afternoon flew by, and Ethan left the office feeling lighter. He had finally found something that made sense to him. The fear was still there, but it was now overshadowed by excitement. He didn't know exactly where this path would take him, but he knew he was ready to face it with courage. The next day, Ethan woke up with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. This would be his first official day at the foundation, and while he knew the responsibilities ahead wouldn't be easy, he was determined to make a difference. Something inside him, a newfound sense of purpose, was pushing him forward, giving him the strength to embrace the challenges ahead. Ethan dressed simply but professionally that morning and left his home earlier than usual. The route to Sam's office was starting to feel familiar, and the warm, welcoming atmosphere of the foundation seemed more inviting with each visit. Upon his arrival, he was greeted by Mary, who was waiting with a stack of neatly organized papers spread across the meeting room table. "Good morning, Ethan. Are you ready to get started?" she asked with a gentle smile. "Yes, I'm ready, Mary," he replied, though his nerves were still lingering. Mary chuckled softly, shaking her head. "No need for ma'am, just call me Mary. Here, we're all equals, working toward a common goal." She pulled out a chair and sat next to him, spreading out the papers. "Today, I want to show you some of the stories of the people we work with. I know this might feel overwhelming at first, but every one of these stories shares something in common. They show how a life can drastically change with just a bit of support and understanding." Ethan picked up the first file. It told the story of a woman named Solange who had lost everything after a workplace accident. Without support, she ended up homeless, living on the streets. He read about her despair and her eventual reintegration into society, thanks to the Foundation's help. Solange now worked for one of the companies partnered with the Foundation. "It's been a long journey for her, but you can see the difference the right help at the right time can make," Mary said, watching Ethan absorb the story. "Incredible," he replied, amazed by the transformative power of empathy and assistance. "And this is just one of many cases," Mary continued. "You'll hear a lot more stories like this. Starting today, you'll be part of this work. We'll take things slow, but I want you to start getting to know some of our clients, understanding their needs, and building trust with them." Ethan nodded, understanding the seriousness of the task. The responsibility of being the bridge between the people they helped and the opportunities offered by the Foundation weighed heavily on him, but he was ready for it. He knew these individuals carried emotional scars and that he'd need to approach them with patience and care. "Today, you'll come with me to one of our community centers," Mary explained, gathering the papers. "I want you to meet Daniel, one of our recent cases. He's got a lot of potential, but trust has been a big issue for him. He's still struggling to accept help." Ethan listened closely, noting how delicate the situation sounded. Daniel seemed like someone who needed time and understanding, and Ethan knew he'd have to tread carefully to build a connection. They soon left the office and drove to the community center, located in a less affluent part of the city. The center was simple but well kept, a beacon of hope in an otherwise tough environment. When they arrived, they were greeted by the center's coordinator, who led them to where Daniel was sitting. Daniel, a man around 35, sat at a corner table with a closed-off expression, absorbed in an old newspaper. He barely looked up when Mary and Ethan approached. "Daniel, good to see you," Mary said warmly. "This is Ethan. He's just started working with us, and he'll be spending some time with you over the next few days." Daniel briefly glanced at Ethan, his posture still guarded. He didn't say much at first, and Ethan knew better than to push too hard. "Hi, Daniel. Nice to meet you," Ethan said, extending his hand with a friendly smile. Daniel stared at Ethan's hand for a few moments before offering a quick, unenthusiastic shake. "Nice to meet you," he mumbled, his eyes quickly returning to the newspaper. Mary remained silent, letting Ethan handle the introduction. Ethan understood that trying to force a connection would be a mistake. He had to build trust slowly. "I'm sure you've seen a lot of people come through here offering help," Ethan began, keeping his tone calm and respectful. "I just want to understand how we can work together in a way that suits you." Daniel gave him a sideways glance, his expression skeptical. "You think you can understand what I've been through just by looking at me?" he asked, his tone slightly challenging. Ethan nodded, accepting Daniel's defensiveness. "No, you're right. I can't understand just by looking, but I can listen if you're willing to talk," Ethan replied, keeping his voice gentle but direct. Daniel shrugged, still guarded, but Ethan noticed a hint of curiosity in his body language. The walls Daniel had built around himself wouldn't come down easily, but Ethan sensed there was a chance to build a bridge over time. The interaction wasn't a breakthrough, but Ethan knew this would be a gradual process. After they left the community center, Mary smiled at him. "You handled Daniel well. He doesn't trust easily, so don't get discouraged. It'll take time, but you've already made the first step." Ethan smiled, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. "Thank you, Mary. I know it'll be a process, but I'm committed." "And that's exactly what we need," she replied. "The most important thing is not to give up. Every small victory counts, even if it seems insignificant." In the days that followed, Ethan returned to the community center, each time hoping to earn a little more of Daniel's trust. Progress was slow, as expected. Daniel still kept his emotional distance, but Ethan remained patient. He knew that trust couldn't be rushed. One morning, Ethan arrived at the community center to find Daniel in his usual corner, flipping through an old book. Ethan approached quietly, sitting next to him, without saying anything right away. Sometimes, presence without pressure was the best way to build trust. After a few minutes of silence, Daniel spoke without looking up from his book. "You're persistent, aren't you?" Ethan smiled softly, recognizing this as Daniel's way of acknowledging him. "I'm not here to bother you, Daniel. I'm here to listen whenever you're ready to talk." Daniel shut his book and set it aside, finally looking at Ethan. "Listen, huh? Everyone says they want to listen, but nobody ever actually does anything." Ethan leaned in slightly, sensing that this was a critical moment. "I understand. It must be frustrating to hear promises without action, but I'm here to try something different. I don't have all the answers, and I can't change what's happened to you. But I can help you change what comes next." Daniel's eyes stayed locked on Ethan, as if weighing his sincerity. "Do you even know what it's like to be out on the street? To fight every day just to survive and still have people treat you like you don't exist?" Ethan felt the weight of Daniel's question. He couldn't fully understand Daniel's experiences, but he could imagine the struggle. "No, Daniel, I don't know what that's like, but I can imagine how hard it must be. That's why I want to help, if you'll let me." Daniel took a deep breath, the battle between his distrust and his desire for change evident on his face. "Help, huh?" he muttered. "Help usually comes with a price, and I've paid enough prices already." Ethan nodded, understanding Daniel's hesitance. "I get that. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise that I'm here to walk through it with you. No strings attached." Daniel didn't respond immediately, but his guarded posture softened ever so slightly. It wasn't a full breakthrough, but it was a step in the right direction. As Ethan left the center that day, he felt more attuned to the challenges ahead. Earning Daniel's trust would take time, but he was committed to seeing it through. Ethan nodded, recognizing the deep pain in Daniel's words. He understood that earning the trust of someone who had been through so much would take time and patience. "I'm not going to promise you anything I can't deliver, Daniel," Ethan said calmly. "But what I can guarantee is that I'm not here to ask anything of you. I just want you to have a chance to start over. But that can only happen if you believe it's possible." Daniel stared at him, a mixture of distrust and curiosity flashing in his eyes, the kind of look Ethan had seen in others before, a look from someone who had been let down too many times, but deep down, still wanted to believe in something better. After a long silence, Daniel finally sighed. "All right, Ethan, let's see where this goes," he said without much enthusiasm, but with a tone that suggested he was willing to give it a try. For Ethan, those words were a small but meaningful step forward. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but Daniel's willingness to even entertain the possibility of change was a breakthrough. In the weeks that followed, Ethan visited the community center regularly, staying connected with Daniel. Slowly, Daniel began to open up about his life, sharing pieces of his story. He had once been an ordinary worker with a stable life and family, but a workplace accident left him unable to work. Bills piled up, and when he couldn't provide, his wife left him, taking their children. Without support or resources, Daniel lost his home and eventually found himself on the streets, where he had spent the last 2 years struggling to survive. Ethan listened to every detail without interrupting. He knew Daniel needed space to release the heavy burden of his suffering, and it became clear how important it was for these stories to be truly heard, not just acknowledged, but connected with on a human level. After one of these conversations, Ethan felt the time was right to make a proposal. "Daniel, I know you've been through a lot," Ethan began cautiously, "and I'm not here to force anything on you. But the foundation can help you find a new job, something that fits your skills and your situation. You don't have to decide right now, but I want you to think about it. It's a chance to start over." Daniel frowned, visibly hesitant. "A job? You really think someone's going to hire me? Look at me." He gestured to his worn-out clothes, and the lines of hardship etched into his face. "Who's going to want me for a job?" Ethan understood Daniel's doubt. Years on the streets had shattered his self-esteem, but Ethan knew there was potential to rebuild it. "Trust me, Daniel," he said softly. "We work with companies that give opportunities to people who want to start over. It won't be easy, but it's possible, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way." Daniel stared at Ethan for a few seconds, contemplating the offer. He knew it was a risk to trust again, especially after all he had been through. But deep down, he also knew that his current life on the streets offered no future. "I'll think about it," he said at last. While the response was cautious, Ethan knew it marked progress. The days that followed brought a shift in Daniel and Ethan's relationship. Slowly, the walls that once stood between them began to crumble. Daniel wasn't fully trusting yet, but he was allowing himself to engage, to consider the possibility of change. One sunny Wednesday morning, Ethan arrived at the community center as usual. But this time, something was different. Daniel sat in his usual corner, but with a more upright posture. His eyes, usually filled with guarded distance, held a spark of determination. Ethan approached him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Daniel. How's everything going?" Ethan asked. Daniel looked at him, and after a moment of silence, he spoke with a firmer voice than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Daniel began, "about starting over. I'm still not sure if I'm ready, but I can't keep living like this. I need to try something different." Ethan felt a wave of satisfaction upon hearing those words. Daniel had been wrestling with his doubts and fears for weeks, and now he was ready to take a step forward. "I'm really glad to hear that, Daniel," Ethan said with calm encouragement. "And remember, we don't have to do everything at once. We'll take it one step at a time. The important thing is that you're open to trying." Daniel nodded, though he was still visibly anxious about the prospect of returning to the workforce. After so long away from it, the thought of re-entering a structured environment was intimidating. Ethan could sense Daniel's apprehension, but he was prepared to help him navigate it. "I think I could start with something small," Daniel said thoughtfully. "I don't know if I can handle a full-time job right now, but maybe something part-time." Ethan smiled, pleased with Daniel's willingness to be open. He knew the foundation worked with companies that offered part-time roles, especially for people reintegrating into society. "We can absolutely start with that, Daniel," Ethan said. "I'll talk to Mary and Sam, and I'm sure we can find something suitable for you. We'll go at your pace. No rush." Daniel seemed relieved by Ethan's approach. He didn't want to be pressured, and Ethan understood that patience was key. Later that day, Ethan returned to the Foundation's office to discuss Daniel's situation with Sam and Mary. As he explained Daniel's desire for a part-time position, they listened carefully. "That's excellent, Ethan," Sam said, smiling approvingly. "We can reach out to one of our partners that works in recycling. They're always looking for help on the production line, and it's a low-stress environment, perfect for someone starting fresh." Mary nodded in agreement. "And the best part is, they're familiar with our reintegration programs. They've worked with people in similar situations before, so they'll be patient with Daniel. It's a great opportunity for him." Ethan felt a surge of gratitude. He was surrounded by people who truly believed in giving others a second chance. And he knew this was just the beginning for Daniel. Finding a job was only the first step, but it was an important one. Daniel needed this opportunity, not just to earn an income, but to rebuild his self-worth, to feel like he had value again. The following week, Ethan met with Daniel at the community center to share the news. "Daniel, I've spoken with Sam and Mary, and we found a part-time position at a recycling company. It's a good fit for you, low stress, supportive environment. What do you think?" Daniel, still nervous, but showing more openness than before, nodded slowly. "Part-time? Yeah, that sounds like something I could manage. It's a start, right?" "It's absolutely a start," Ethan replied. "And I'll be with you through the whole process. We'll take it one day at a time." Daniel smiled faintly, the first real smile Ethan had seen from him. For the first time in a long while, Daniel saw a glimmer of hope for his future. It was a small step, but a monumental one in his journey back to reclaiming his life. And for Ethan, every small victory like this was worth celebrating, knowing that it was these moments of trust and courage that made all the difference. The next day, Ethan returned to the community center to meet with Daniel and deliver the good news. "Daniel, I found something that I think will be perfect for you," Ethan said as he sat down beside him. "It's at a recycling company, part-time, and they're willing to give you all the support you need to feel comfortable." Daniel looked surprised, but there was a glimmer of curiosity in his eyes. "Recycling, huh?" he muttered, processing the idea. "I never thought I'd work with that, but it sounds like something I could do." "It's a good start," Ethan encouraged, leaning forward slightly. "You'll learn gradually, and more importantly, you'll begin to feel like you're part of something again." Daniel paused for a few seconds, deep in thought. Then, with a deep breath, he finally agreed. "All right, I'll give it a try." Ethan felt a wave of satisfaction wash over him. Seeing Daniel accept this opportunity was a powerful reminder that the work he was doing at the foundation was truly making a difference. But more than that, it was proof that when people receive the right help and support, they can begin to rewrite their stories, even after enduring the darkest moments. On Daniel's first day of work, Ethan made sure to accompany him to the recycling company. He knew how important it was to be there at the start of something new. When they arrived, they were greeted by the manager, a middle-aged man with a friendly, welcoming demeanor. "Daniel, welcome," the manager said, shaking his hand. "We're happy to have you here. We'll start slow, and if you need anything, we're here to help." Daniel thanked him quietly, still a bit unsure, but Ethan could see the determination in his eyes. He was ready to give his best effort. After a brief introduction and explanation of the tasks, Ethan said goodbye, leaving Daniel in the capable hands of the manager. As Ethan walked away from the company, a smile spread across his face. He knew this wasn't the end of Daniel's journey, but the beginning of something much bigger. Daniel had taken his first real step toward a new life. That afternoon, Ethan returned to the Foundation's office, where Mary and Sam were waiting. "So, how did it go?" Sam asked, eager to hear about Daniel's first day. "He accepted," Ethan said with a satisfied smile. "Today was his first day, and I think he's going to do well. It's just the beginning, but it's a big step." Mary and Sam exchanged proud looks. "Excellent work, Ethan," Mary said, her eyes sparkling with pride. "You've made a real difference in Daniel's life. Keep it up, and soon we'll have many more success stories like this." Ethan allowed himself to soak in the positive weight of Mary's words. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Helping Daniel find a path was just the beginning of his mission. There were many others like Daniel, people waiting for someone to believe in them. The day ended with a deep sense of fulfillment. Ethan understood that the work in the community was far from over. Many more people needed help, and countless challenges lay ahead. But he felt ready for them. He wasn't alone in this fight. He had the community beside him, and together they could continue to change lives. As Ethan walked home that evening, he looked up at the starry sky, feeling the gentle night breeze against his face. He thought about everything he had been through to get to this point. Every hardship and every victory. For the first time in a long while, he felt completely at peace, knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be. With a satisfied smile, Ethan realized that no matter what came next, he was prepared. Because in the end, he had learned that real change begins with small acts of kindness and the unwavering commitment to never give up on people.